I can guarantee you that nothing will make you lose more sleep than when you look into how many people go missing after crashing their car, how they seemingly vanish into thin air, sometimes within just minutes. That's what happened to Jason Landry, and his story never fails to keep me up at night. Jason Landry was a 21-year-old student at Texas State University when he mysteriously disappeared on December 13th, 2020. What's scary to me is the fact that almost all of his movements that night were traced from his phone records, but he somehow vanished within 67 minutes in an area that he wasn't supposed to be in. That night, Jason left his apartment in San Marcos, Texas to go back home for Christmas. He left his apartment at 10:55 p.m., and his plan was to drive to his hometown of Missouri City, Texas, where all of his family members were waiting for him for the holidays. It should have only been about a 2.5-hour drive, but Jason never showed up, and what happened after this has never been explained. Instead, his dad was woken up at 2 in the morning by a phone call, and on the other end was a highway patrol officer who told him that his son's car was just found wrecked and abandoned along a gravel road in Luling, Texas. This immediately stood out as odd to Jason's dad because Luling was in the complete opposite direction from where he was supposed to be heading. A volunteer firefighter had reportedly found Jason's car 31 minutes after midnight, so not long after he left his apartment that night. It was abandoned near the 2700 block of Salt Flat Road, and just from looking at the pictures, it seems pretty desolate, and it's definitely pretty far off from the highway where he was supposed to be. It looked as if Jason had been in a single car crash, and from what authorities can piece together, it looked like he possibly overcorrected on the gravel road and then spun out of control, eventually hitting a few trees and a barbed wire fence. The front passenger door was locked, the keys were still in the ignition, and the headlights were on. But then the officer tells him that Jason is nowhere to be found, which is especially concerning because he had very obviously been in a car wreck in an area that he didn't know. So his dad immediately drove to the crash site and was stunned to find nobody there. Not a single police officer was looking for his son, but his dad walked into an incredibly eerie scene. About 900 feet from where his wrecked car was found were Jason's clothes, strewn across the desolate gravel road. I'm talking about all of the clothes he was wearing at the time of the crash. So his shirt, shorts, socks, underwear, and even his shoes. Some of his clothes had small drops of blood on them, and his watch was also found on the road. What's absolutely crazy to me though is the fact that authorities didn't process the scene as a crime. So after Jason's car was found, they didn't search it. Instead, they had it towed to an impound lot. But Jason's dad knew that the clothes surrounding the crash site did belong to Jason because he liked to wear really bright colored socks, and the socks that were laying in the road were bright yellow SpongeBob socks. The temperature was near freezing the night Jason crashed his car, and now with him being missing and not getting a hold of his family, his dad knew something was horribly wrong, and because the crash site wasn't listed as a crime scene, nothing had been taken in as evidence. So Jason's dad had to actually collect all of his son's items as evidence and bring them into the police station himself. This is when he said, "Hey, you know my son is missing, why isn't anyone out looking for him?" And this is kind of what got the ball rolling, because at first it really seemed like the police couldn't be bothered. So then Jason's dad was taken to his car, and when he looked inside, he found Jason's phone stuck between the driver's seat and the center console. Eventually, a formal search did happen, and this is when more of Jason's belongings were found. About 900 feet in the opposite direction of where his clothes were found, police found Jason's backpack, which contained his laptop, gaming equipment, and a small amount of WEED. Also found in this area was a plastic bag with some of Jason's toiletries in it, as well as his tumbler with his pet fish in it. But sadly, at this point, they were all dead. It was at this point that the gravity of the situation kind of set in for authorities, and a massive search for Jason was launched. They searched in the nearby woods and farmlands and in every abandoned house and shed for miles. They brought in tracking dogs, horses, and drones, and they searched for months, but absolutely no trace of Jason was ever found. It was like Jason vanished into thin air. So then authorities started combing through his phone records to see what they could find, and what's crazy is that almost all of his movements the night he went missing were recorded because he used the Waze app. So the timeline of his last movements were thankfully captured, but it really only brings more questions. Phone records show Jason leaving his apartment in San Marcos at 10:55 p.m. He then begins driving on Highway 80, and at 11:05 p.m. he goes under I-35 in San Marcos and continues south. At 11:21 p.m. he enters Stairtown, Texas, and just a few minutes later he enters the city of Luling. Continuing on Highway 80, he goes through the intersection of Hackberry Street, and this is where Highway 80 becomes Austin Street. At this point, Jason stops using the Waze app and opens Snapchat, which shows him continuing on Austin Street to the intersection with Magnolia Avenue. He goes through the intersection and continues on Austin Street, but after this, his digital footprint just stops. Police believe that he ends up driving on Spruce Street, which eventually turns into Salt Flat Road, where his car would be found wrecked and abandoned. What happened after this? Nobody knows. Jason's phone was still on and still had a signal when he crashed his car, but for some reason it didn't capture any of his very last moments. From the time his digital footprint stops to when his car was discovered wrecked was 67 minutes. And to this day, the biggest mystery is what happened in those 67 minutes. We know he crashed his car somehow, but police believe that no one else was involved in the crash, and they say they found no evidence that he was kidnapped or harmed in any way. The Caldwell County Sheriff's Office stated that there's no evidence a crime even happened. No blood was found inside of Jason's car, and the drops of blood found on his clothes were small enough to suggest that he didn't suffer a serious injury in the crash. Authorities have reviewed hundreds of hours of video footage from all over Luling from the minute he crashed his car to weeks after the fact, but nothing was ever found. Jason didn't appear in any of the footage. Police found no evidence to suggest that he was planning to meet someone in Luling, so the question remains on why he was there in the first place on that specific remote gravel road and so far off the highway. With no evidence of what happened to Jason, his case soon fell cold. Then, Texas Search and Rescue started working on the case to try and find Jason. They used AI and nearly a year's worth of drone images to search 6 points of interest. These were 6 places where computers/technology thought Jason could be out there in the field near where he crashed his car that night. During their search, they did find a lot of bones, but none of them turned out to be human, and again, absolutely no trace of Jason was found. Then in 2022, Jason's case would gain momentum again when a man who eerily resembled him was found unconscious in New York, over 1,700 miles away. This gave his family some hope that Jason was finally found, but unfortunately, the man was not Jason. He was a resident of Yonkers in New York who just so happened to also be missing, and it's sad because he really did look so much like Jason. Authorities have done forensic testing, have issued a bunch of search warrants, and have taken numerous witness testimonies, but no trace of Jason has ever been found, and there are no leads or any evidence in this case. Additionally, multiple private investigators have also worked on this case, but no suspects or any persons of interest have been found. Police believe that he's either somewhere still out there near Salt Flat Road or someone else was involved, even though they can't find any evidence of that. They urge anyone who lives in the area who might have any cameras on private property to still send it in. Or if you live on private property out there that has never been searched, please consider letting authorities search it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There are so many cases like this where people, especially young men, crashed their car and then mysteriously disappear. It really does need to be studied because it is terrifying. It's now been 4 years, and whatever happened that night causing Jason to crash his car and then disappear remains a mystery. There's a $20,000 reward for information leading to his whereabouts. These are some of his characteristics, and if you have any information, please contact the number on the screen.